At the same time, a man arrived at an abandoned warehouse that was near where Jiang was and informed his leader that he had already returned. At the same time, a man arrived at an abandoned warehouse that was near where Jiang was and informed his leader that he had already returned. Upon seeing that he had come back, the leader asked him why he had taken so long and also gave him the order to quickly report on what was really happening in the spider's nest. This man was wearing a hood, had green hair, and was quite scared. He informed his leader that the spider's nest had been annihilated by someone mysterious and unknown, with a crushing annihilation that left not a single monster alive. His superior, who was a tall man with braids, couldn't believe what his ears had just heard. He turned his head towards his subordinate and with a surprised look asked if this was some kind of joke. He couldn't believe that someone had completely annihilated the spider's nest. Another man who was by their side approached them, and upon hearing this, he was shocked. The man with green hair approached them and with a serious look, he replied that this was true, adding that the city of monsters was in ruins. Upon hearing this, their leader put his hand on his chin, began to look towards the ground. He was unable to believe that the nest had been razed to ashes. This was too terrifying to hear. Although at first he questioned if the culprit could be a member of the Night Watch, he later dismissed this idea as it was not the style of the Night Watch. He came to the conclusion that the responsible party must be some secret operation from a hidden family or a powerful assault group. He decided that it was best for them to retreat now. For them, this was a shame. They had been entrusted with the mission of filling a bottle with the venom of a wolf spider. Now that they had failed, he decided to make up for the losses on the way back by robbing some unfortunate ones. Upon hearing this, the man next to him turned his head towards him and couldn't help but sweat and panic. While they were talking, someone opened the door of the abandoned warehouse. Upon hearing the sound of the door opening, the three turned their heads back and the man with green hair revealed to the other two that they had an unexpected visitor. Upon hearing this, they couldn't help but wonder who this person could be. A man put his hand on the door and as he slowly opened it, told them that he had finally found other professionals. Upon hearing this, the leader asked him who he was. This person was Jiang. He entered the warehouse, started walking towards them, dropped an arm, extended his hand towards them and with a calm look asked them not to worry since he had only come here to level up. He also added that he had come to exchange some food with them. Upon hearing this, their leader felt relieved as Jiang had come alone. He turned his head towards him, started looking into his eyes and with a smile agreed to exchange some food with him, adding that food in the desert wasn't cheap. After saying this, he asked Jiang what he wanted to exchange. The expression of the man next to him changed drastically. He adopted an offensive stance and began to stare at Jiang. Jiang approached the leader, started looking into his eyes and with a smile asked him not to worry, adding that he had some very good items to exchange. Upon hearing this, the man's expression changed drastically once again. He began to look at Jiang and couldn't help but smile and feel curious about what he wanted to exchange. The leader ordered Jiang to show him what objects he had. At that moment, the two men surrounded Jiang and with a smile, they started unsheathing their swords. He simply turned his head slightly towards them and couldn't help but smile. From the beginning, he knew he couldn't trust them, so without thinking twice, he activated the ring and extended his hand towards them. In the blink of an eye, several spiders came out of the ring and with a piercing gaze they started looking at the men. Jiang turned his back on them and with a mocking voice asked if his products were good. Upon seeing the spiders, the men sheathed their swords again, took a few steps back, and went on high alert. The men began to look at the spiders and couldn't help but sweat and feel fear. They were aware that these were wolf spiders. They started to question if they had not been annihilated along with the spider nest. Thinking this, they began to wonder if Jiang was the person who had killed all the spiders. The current level of Jiang Chen was 17. He slightly turned his head towards them, started looking at them with an overwhelming gaze, and with a smile, he asked them not to think that he didn't know what they wanted to do. After saying this, Jiang sat on a rock, slightly turned his head towards them and calmly revealed that he was very angry now. So he advised them to grab their weapons and leave right away from here. Upon hearing this, the three men grabbed their belongings, turned their backs to Jiang, started running, and apologized for bothering him, adding that they were leaving right away. Several minutes later, once the men had fled from the warehouse, Jiang extended his hand to the side, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist. He gave the order for the insects to come out. While Jiang was sitting on the rock, with one arm resting on his knee, he reached up and used the poisonous mist to release two insects. They began flying around him, with a murderous look in their eyes, searching for any hidden threat. Jiang began to drink a little bit of soup that the men had left. He was getting hungrier and thought he should have known better when he first obtained Little Nine. He didn't expect leading the swarm of insects to have such side effects. When drinking the soup, a system window appeared and Jiang's devouring value increased. Now he had 2768 points out of 1 million. The system advised him to increase the value as soon as possible. Originally, he had thought that the devouring value would increase faster after the insect swarm doubled, but he did not expect that the devouring value of the next reproduction would also double. This complicated things a lot for Jiang, since now the devouring value that a boss could provide was just a drop in the bucket. Even if he eliminated all the beast nests outside the city, it wouldn't be enough to fill up the devouring value for the next reproduction. Jiang started looking down at the ground and sank into his thoughts. He had heard that the beast nests and secret realms controlled by Nightwatch were not going to be made public, which meant that if he wanted to increase his swarm's devouring value, then he had to join the Nightwatch as soon as possible. He began to look at his hand and saw that little Nine had not yet woken up. Upon seeing this, he quickly came to the conclusion that the burden of reproduction was not small. At that moment, Jiang started to feel someone's presence. Immediately, his expression changed drastically as he turned his head to one side and wondered what this person was doing here. He stood up, clenched his fist tightly, slightly turned his head to one side, and assumed an offensive stance. He could smell the scent of battle and how there were a lot of people chasing after her. He didn't know what was happening here and why she was being pursued. Several seconds later, a girl who was using an invisibility spell entered the warehouse, bumped into Jiang, and fell to the ground. She was the same girl as before. She supported herself with one hand on the floor and began touching her head with the other because it hurt. Jiang turned his head towards her and with a confused look, began to wonder why he had encountered her again. While the girl was lying on the ground, she placed one hand on the floor, put the other on her chest, lifted her head towards Jiang and immediately recognized him as the boy from the spider's nest. She started looking at him with a frightened gaze and asked him not to tell anyone that he had seen her here. Upon hearing this, Jiang couldn't help but be shocked. He turned his head towards her and couldn't help but look at her with a surprised expression. She had been so close to him and he hadn't even been able to sense her presence. It didn't take him long to come to the conclusion that the person the man with blue hair was chasing was her. He decided to take the girl somewhere safe, but at that moment he felt someone's presence. Quickly, he turned his head towards the warehouse entrance, and with a serious look, he thought it was already too late to leave. Several seconds later, several people entered the warehouse. Among them were Zheng Tai and the man with blue hair who was part of the Xiao family. They began to walk towards Jiang, and Zheng Tai didn't take long to recognize him. He couldn't help but feel fear and chills. He pointed at Jiang with his finger and informed his leader that he was the same guy they had encountered before. The man with blue hair put his hand in his pants pocket, started staring at Jiang, and with a smile praised his subordinate for having a good sense of smell. Jiang sat back down on the rock, rested his hands on his knees, and remained silent. Upon looking more closely, the man realized that this place was empty and Jiang was actually camping alone. With a gaze filled with anger, Zheng Tai began to look at Jiang and asked him if a girl had entered the warehouse a moment ago. He ordered him to respond immediately or else this time he was going to kill him. The man with blue hair started looking at Jiang, put his hand in front of Zheng Tai, and with a smile asked him to wait. He approached him, began to sit on the rock in front of Jiang. He knew that he was from the spiritual master class. He noticed that Jiang had leveled up very quickly. It had been less than a day since they last saw each other, and he was already level 16. The man became more and more interested in Jiang. He decided to set this topic aside and explained that he now had something urgent to do. While he was sitting on the rock, Jiang simply remained silent. He sat on the rock, rested an arm on his knee, drew his sword, began aiming at Jiang's neck, and with a serious look asked him if he had seen a girl with black hair around here. His subordinates approached, stood behind him, and remained silent. Jiang simply remained calm, started looking into the man's eyes and quickly concluded that based on the aura emanating from his body, his level was very high, surpassing level 30. Seeing that he could accurately detect his class and level, he thought this man must have some detection equipment with him. Jiang turned his head to the side, began pointing towards the back door of the warehouse with his finger, and explained to the man that he had just seen someone's shadow going in that direction. He also added that because he wasn't of the perceptive class, he wasn't sure if that was the person they were looking for. Upon hearing this, the man started to stand up and tentatively decided to believe him. He also advised Jiang to be more honest. Upon hearing this, Jiang turned his head towards him and was somewhat surprised. He stood up, turned his back to Jiang, slightly turned his head towards him, began to look into his eyes, and with a murderous gaze warned him that if he found out that he had helped that girl, then the Xiao family wouldn't let him go. Upon hearing this, Zheng Tai also turned his head slightly towards him and couldn't help but smile. Several seconds later, the man and his subordinates began to leave the warehouse. Jiang turned his body towards them, and as he watched them gradually move away, he remembered that the Xiao family was the most powerful family in Zhenguo. With a penetrating gaze, he started to look at the man with blue hair and thought that the clans in the city had a long history and all of them were feudal officials. They were also extremely mysterious and rarely entered the world unless a great disaster occurred. Some powerful men in the family could even split the heavens and the earth. This guy was more powerful than Jiang had thought. For him, it wasn't good to be remembered by someone like that. Several seconds later, Jiang slightly turned his head towards the warehouse exit, and seeing that the men had already left, he decided to leave as well since it wasn't good for him to stay in this place. The girl came out of her hiding place, approached Jiang, put her hands on her hips, and thanked him for saving her. Jiang stood up, turned his body towards her, and remained silent. He quickly grabbed her arm, and upon seeing this, the girl panicked and started wondering what he had planned to do. Jiang approached her, started looking into her eyes with an aggressive gaze, and told her that she almost fooled him like last time. Since he had helped her again this time, he asked how she had gotten in trouble with these people. With Jiang so close to her, she couldn't help but blush. She began looking at him and explained that her family had a huge debt. The guy planned to take away the things they were escorting and kill them all, but he didn't expect her to escape. He was afraid that the news would leak out, so he was chasing after her for this reason. After explaining this, she asked Jiang if he wanted to silence her. Upon hearing this, Jiang let go of her hand, turned his back on her, and began to walk away from her. Upon seeing this, she placed a hand on her chest, extended the other towards him, and told him that she would always remember that he had helped her and that she would also be very grateful to him in the future. While he was distancing himself from her, he closed his eyes, clenched his fists tightly, and told her that he didn't want to get involved in her affairs. At that moment, Jiang abruptly stopped, opened his eyes, and thought that something was not right. The girl also noticed this, and her expression changed drastically. With a fearful look, she revealed to him that someone had just placed a barrier spell around the warehouse. At that moment, someone who was outside the warehouse gave the order to their subordinates to come out. Jiang started looking towards the entrance of the warehouse and thought that now it was impossible to escape. He knew that even if the girl said she didn't know him, they wouldn't believe her anymore. He activated his insect perception and began walking around the area, realizing they were surrounded on all sides. With a serious look, Jiang began to stare towards the entrance of the warehouse, ready to face any opponent. On the other side, the girl got scared and placed her hand on her chest. Several seconds later, the man with blue hair and his subordinates appeared. Their bodies started emanating a killer aura. With a penetrating gaze, they began to look at Jiang, ready to finish him off. He knew that Jiang had lied to him. He approached him, stared into his eyes, and ordered him to hand over the girl. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.